Hello and welcome to a brand new season of Fintech Insider Focus. I'm Rachel Pandyan, Ventures Product Lead here at 11FS, and we are back in collaboration with Visa to shine a light on fintech in different parts of the world. To start off this season, we're going to be honing in on the Middle East's booming financial sector and speak to the people who are right at the heart of it. And in this episode, we're discussing the banking industry in Saudi Arabia. The country's finance industry is making huge strides, thanks in part to a concerted effort by the government and the Saudi Central Bank. So we're going to explore this a little bit more by picking apart some of the detail in their Vision 2030 program, looking at what action is actually being taken to transform the banking system in the region, and how fintech can be a driving force behind it. To discuss this, I'm joined by a mighty panel of industry experts. But firstly, a big hello to my co-host, Hasan Kazmi, Head of Digital Partnerships for CEMEA at Visa. How are you, Hasan? It's so great to be teaming up with you for this. So please tell our listeners a little bit about you, what you do, and why you're part of this series.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's great to be here and great to do my first podcast with you guys. So a little bit about myself. So I lead digital partnerships, which means all of fintechs for the CEMEA region, as you mentioned. And that for us includes Central and Eastern Europe, all of the GCC countries, all of Africa, and all of Pakistan. So my team and I are responsible for looking at all of the different fintech activities, clients, accounts across this region. And this topic specifically is very close to my heart because before Visa, I had a career in banking. So it's great to be here with this panel. We can talk a lot about banking, a lot about why Saudi Arabia is really at the forefront of innovation in banking and in payments. So looking forward to a great discussion.
Oh, I'm sure you're going to have so much to share. We are also delighted to welcome Naim, SVP, Group Head of Strategy and Digital Transformation at Bank Al Jazeera. Great to have you here. Again, would love to hear a little bit more about you and your background.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's great to be here with yourself, Hassan, and Ms. Naim, who we'll hear about a bit later. My name is Naim. I'm the Group Head of Strategy and Transformation at Bank Al Jazeera. Bank Al Jazeera is going to be 50 years old next year in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So we've been around a long time and we intend to be around for the next 50 years. Our ambition is to be a leading Islamic bank in the region. We are dedicated to our purpose of enriching lives through financial well-being. And my role touches on many different aspects of part of that transformation and setting us up for the future. There's the digital transformation, people transformation, culture, as well as the technology that underpins all of this. There's a wide variety of stakeholders involved, ranging from the regulators to boards to customers, and a lot of industry bodies and partnerships that we are looking to grow into. It's a pleasure to be here today. And a quick shout out to all our Muslim listeners around the world, Ramadan Kareem, right, for the forthcoming month for all of those who are acknowledging and celebrating, as well as a big boxing match tonight, Francis and Ghana, right? To all my African brothers out there, right? I'm South African, so a big shout out to them, and obviously to your UK listeners, right? For Anthony Joshua, I'm sure it'll be very exciting, and I think it also talks about the transformation and the change that's happening in the kingdom at this moment in time. So great to be here. Lovely to share the panel.
Yeah, so great to have you. And I think culture is such a big part of this. And I'm so excited that we're here to talk just a little bit about fintech, but also a lot about the country and all of the changes to come. And finally, joining this week is Naif Abu Saida, CEO and founder of Haka, one of the amazing emerging fintechs in the scene. So welcome to the show. Do tell us about yourself and a little bit more about the company.
Sure. Thank you, Rachel. I'm Naif Abu Saida. I'm the founder of Haka. We are specialized fintech in financial saving domain. And we specialize to modernize and revolution this industry of savings, since there's a lot of savings crisis in the region and mainly in the Saudi Arabia. We started officially in 2018, but since then we got the license or the permit from Central Bank in 2020. And since then the team and the company growth more than 12-fold. And we are one of the fastest growth startup in the region, focusing more into underbanked individuals to help them with the financial savings and to close the gap. And this is aligned also with the Vision 2030. About myself, I started my official career as a banker 25 years ago. I'm not a fresh grad founders. I have a lot of white hair. My experience different from corporate services to financial risk to operational risk. Then I shift my career entirely to marketing communications, work in different industries from aviation to ICT to power and water to healthcare to giga projects. I'm also an advisor for the CEO of Naim, the giga projects in the Saudi Arabia.
Wow. Absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining, and thanks to all of you for being here. Before we dive in, just as a reminder to listeners, the views and opinions of our panel are their own and don't necessarily reflect those of the companies they're representing. And as always, nothing we say should be taken as tax, financial, or legal advice. So please, please, please do your own research, but please do listen in because we're going to be sharing lots of really interesting stuff today. So let's dive in. And just to start us off, Hassan, I'd love to hear your perspective from Visa and how exciting you guys are finding the Saudi fintech landscape right now, because obviously, as we've already heard, there's lots to talk about.
Yes, it's very hard to describe in words as to what's going on in Saudi Arabia, because to put it in, if I were to try, one word is just phenomenal. And I say this as somebody who's worked across the world. And I've actually worked in Saudi Arabia. The last time I was in Saudi Arabia before my stint at Visa was back in 2011. So when I look at what's happening in Saudi Arabia now compared to what was going on in 2011, that's where the word phenomenal comes from. And having looked at fintech, not only from a Visa lens, but also in my prior career in banking, the pace of growth that you see, that's absolutely phenomenal. The amount of innovation that's happening is phenomenal. The amount of investment that's coming in is absolutely phenomenal. And I think one of the most important thing is, we talked a little bit about Vision 2030, having something like Vision 2030 that clearly lays out some of the key strategic objectives of what the country needs to accomplish makes it so much easier for entrepreneurs, for investors, for bankers to say, that is our goalpost. That is what we are working towards. And that is what allows all of this effort, all of this investment, all of this entrepreneurship to come together and really point towards the North Star, if you would. So a combination of all these things is what makes what's happening in Saudi Arabia so absolutely incredible. And similar to what Naim mentioned with Al Jazeera Bank, Visa has been in Saudi Arabia for 40 years. So we've been here for a very long time, and we'll be here, for the next, hopefully, 400 years. And it's great as Visa evolves, we are evolving with the country and taking it forward.
Yeah, it's so true. And phenomenal it's precisely the right word. Actually, when we were working on a project in the region last year, we did a survey just to say, what do residents feel about this? And the number one word that came up, and we didn't even prompt it, was development. It is development in social, in real estate, in fintech. And that's, I think, from the ambitious plan that initially was brought out, now to see that come to fruition across huge sectors, enabling fintechs is so important. And so talking about the banking sector and all the shifts there, Naim, over to you. What do you think the banking sector in Saudi Arabia looks like today?
I can tell you it looks very different to what it was even 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and definitely 10 years ago. I'm sure my fellow panelists will concur. I think, if I could build on this 2030 vision, because I think it's so critical to everything, right? It's like this big umbrella. You can talk to anybody in the street, in your industry, in your social network. Everybody's excited, everybody's energized around it. And I think you're starting to see the fruition of those. So the ambition level, number one, I think is the first thing, especially when it comes to the rate of transformation in the country, right? And we're talking about the digital solutions that have come in, right, such as STC Pay, right, one of the great success factors in the kingdom. And we'll unpack that, how they launched during COVID, how many customers they've gotten, right, and how that accelerated this adoption of wallets into the kingdom. But I think there's so many exciting other developments. We're seeing this rise of fintechs, right, in Saudi Arabia. I think this is the first year that the kingdom is probably the number one investment destination, right, in the region has probably been the UAE. But you've also seen this nice partnership model being developed between the different central banks, trying to support the broader ecosystem. And I'm sure Hassan, in his role in Visa, would have seen this with the different banks, with the different regulators, trying to unify some of the regulations to create this environment where this transformation happened. And I think the other big thing, right, is this more diversity into the ecosystem, right? We're seeing a lot more female participation, both in the corporate workforce, but also some of the founders that you've come across, right? We've just recently had, last week, and I think traffic was a bit crazy in the kingdom, but we had this big technology conference called LEAP, where all the banks, all the payment houses, all the entities supporting the environment has come around and participated and had these conversations about what's next, and that's where you see the energy coming in. In terms of banking, you've seen this rapid explosion, right, of digital solutions coming into play. You've seen this huge uptake in getting the previously, I wouldn't say underbanked, but I would definitely say maybe the underserved market, right, coming into play. A lot more focus on youth, right, which is about 50% of the Saudi population, right? How do you actually bring them into the fold? I'm sure Naif will talk about how do you increase the savings rate, which is such a underpinning and core to driving, development and growth and changing the behavior of individuals, right, and thinking long term, especially dropping from 6%, which is what it is today in the Financial Services Development Program, to 12%, right? So you have to try and double that. And what you're also seeing is that this has all got some nice tailwinds, right? In Saudi Arabia, you're seeing it's the fastest growing G20 country, right? I think it's compounded annual growth rate in the next 5 years, probably about 3%, which makes it like up there. I think Indonesia is like number 2 or 3, right? To give you a sense of where the development and pace is happening. And what's really interesting is both heavily Islamic populations, right? Heavily digital adoption, heavy, right? Investment in development, but also this take up in education, right? Is just next level that we are seeing. So we're seeing a lot of social demographic shifts. We are seeing technology shifts, and we're also seeing a lot of support coming from the regulator and other bodies and other parties into this space.
Yeah, and it's such a huge space. I'd love to talk. You kind of talked about it there, like about this flourishing fintech scene. Naif, who better to talk through around the role of fintech? So I get a more specific question here. What do you see the role of fintech? Do you think it's around enhancing products and services, or is it actually about developing new products, new technical capabilities, and driving new types of innovation in the market?
Actually, it's both and more. If you look, or if you allow me just to summarize what is the Vision 2030, and part of the Vision 2030, there's another important program called Financial Sector Development Program, FSDB, which is owned and driven by Ministry of Finance with Central Bank and Capital Market Authority and all the related party. The beauty of Vision 2030 and FSDB program, they have clear pillar, clear program with a clear output and measurable ones. So if they said, and it's mentioned there, the target is 520 fintech by 2030. Now we are around 118 fintech in Saudi, which means they need a lot to support and to bring either from the global or from Saudi more startups specialized in fintech domain. Which fintech domain? That's cover everything from the savings to investment to prop tech to health tech or even financing health tech. All what you can imagine, it's open. The beauty of that, Rachel, Hassan, and Naim, if you look, when you have the support from the government and the support from the ecosystem, which is the banking system or the banking sector and other governmental sectors, you have no excuse just to succeed. All what you need is to come with an innovative solution, right problem you want to tackle, and any problem you're looking for is huge by itself. The market is big, regardless you are targeting Saudi for Saudis or you want to target Saudi and expand from Saudi to GCC or Middle East or to the globe. Literally, there's no limit. The second part, the Saudi Arabia is a tech-navy nation. If you look for the government, is very high tech. All the services, digitally, you can order it and finish it. And since this is based in the UK, we can, as a Saudi citizen or residents, you can renew your passports literally in 24 hours. You receive it at your door. You can go for whatever, even if you have an accident in the street, you finish everything on your mobile. You don't wait for the police. For the legal environment, the technical or environments and the infrastructure is set up to succeed and to build on it. So our services in Haka, for example, we couldn't be reached this level without support from the banking, without support from the government, and without existing of this infrastructure.
Yeah, I think that infrastructure is so key. And I think Vision 2030 definitely feels like a really key enabler here. So Hassan, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on Vision 2030. Obviously, financial sector development is a big part of this, as well as all of the things we've been touching on so far beyond that. And just for those who don't know about Vision 2030, the program's mission, working with the Saudi Central Bank, is to make a difference in the financial industry of Saudi Arabia with a focus on banking, insurance, stock markets, and debt markets, to provide banking services that are more accessible by investing in technology and offering a wide range of financial products and services, and to modernize the financial landscape in Saudi Arabia by updating laws and regulations to meet the highest of international standards. And so, Hassan, how have you seen that shift with Vision 2030, what it's enabled, and how Visa are able to play into that a little bit?
Yes. Actually, Rachel, I think you already answered the question that you asked me, which is that's the beauty of Vision 2030, is that it's very comprehensive. Because if you're looking to reform or update a specific sector or specific segment, it can't be done in a vacuum. And the beauty of Vision 30 is the fact that it touches across the entire ecosystem. Because if you try to upgrade a specific part of that ecosystem in a vacuum, it just doesn't work. And the beauty of, again, Vision 2030 is the fact that they've taken a holistic approach and said, okay, if you're looking at modernizing your financial services infrastructure, what are all the key elements around that? And everything has to be uplifted at the same time. Because it's if you don't do it that way, it's like building a house, but you have a weak foundation. So you can create a beautiful ground floor, but it's going to sink because you don't have the right infrastructure support. And that is the key for this plan, is the fact that they've taken a very comprehensive view to understand, okay, fine, if we want fintechs to come in, do we have the right regulatory framework to support them? Do we have an investor base to support the fintechs as they grow? To Naif's point, a lot of fintechs are now saying, yes, we want to start off in Saudi Arabia, but then also expand. So is the regulation supportive of that type of expansion? Because if you just say, oh, I just want a fintech to come and stay in a specific country, well, that in many cases, fintechs are quite ambitious, right? So that in many cases can conflict with a founder or the board's vision to grow it. So already having a regulation that allows a company to set up, it provides them infrastructure support, makes it easy for them to access regulators if there's an issue, makes them easy to access investors for their growth, and then also providing the regulatory framework to expand. That is what I mean by a comprehensive framework. And we've seen this in some other parts of the world, but nothing as well thought out, nothing as well laid out as what we're seeing here.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, what makes this very different than some of the other initiatives you've seen.
Yeah. And I definitely feel, I think particularly in Saudi, but definitely across the Middle East and Asia, culture it really factors into finances in a way that you don't necessarily see in the West. And, values of family, of collaboration, of faith, and how that plays into how you manage your finances. And what I have observed working with CEMEA and the central bank as you try and deliver some of these changes is that they definitely want to see that in proposals. It's not enough to just put AI on your product and hope that you get funding and approval. It's definitely more it's much more linked to Saudi people and their values and trying to grow that ecosystem out to support that in their development. But with that comes some really ambitious targets from a banking perspective. So I think we've talked about the number of emerging fintechs, also over 935 billion in banking assets, 70% increase in the growth rate of digital payments. Like, these are not small targets. We've seen some great progress. Open question to the group. Are these maybe a little bit too ambitious?
Maybe I should jump in here, right? What I can say, right? There's a word that I always describe what's happening here, right? Some say phenomenal, some says transformational. I say it is crazy, right? It is actually crazy, right? As you know, this is how I describe things because you might say it's crazy. I mean, let me just unpack one thing. You got this Vision 2030, ambitious, bold, right? Everybody knows about it, right? Then you start distilling it, right, to the different levels. And there's hardcore KPIs, like you mentioned, around this. One of the KPIs was around home ownership, right? To get it up to like the 65, 70% level, right? By 2030. Overshot that already, way overshot that, right? So when it comes to ambition and target setting, right? Even I think late last week, 100 million tourists in Saudi Arabia, right, in the last couple of years. So these are targets that were set, right, by 2030, which have been blown away almost 5, 6, 7 years in advance of which everybody thought we would be. So I do like this thought about, pushing the boat out there, right, and like really stretching people. And then as you get some of these big mega projects, giga projects landed, as you get these signals of success landed, right, that just motivates everybody else in the ecosystem to do more and more and more. When it comes to banking, right, I think there's still so much of growth still to be made, right? And I love what Hassan and I mentioned about, there's this thing about, thinking globally, acting locally, right? Developing the Saudi economy for the Saudi people, right? But there's also a huge influx of other skills and expertise. I mean, Riyadh, I always say, is going from 8 million people to 16 million people. That is an incredible number, right? And those will all come with their own demand sets, own skills, own expertise, own needs analysis as well, right? But if I look at the challenges, I think there are definitely opportunities to meet these targets, but there's also definitely challenges. I mean, as Hassan said, the regulations is great, but what we've seen also is very good is that the regulation is also getting updated, right? Because the pace of change, right, is so fast, but it's good that this regulation is also happening. What we've also seen is that there's also this like community being developed, right? Not like formally, but there's like fintech meetups on Tuesdays, right? And Wednesdays now that are happening, which is exciting. There are VCs, banks, the capital markets, players all trying to collaborate, right, within the regulatory regime, right, to try and get this to a point where it can start to be not just accelerating, right, to get this level of maturity and industrialization into it. Now, if I saw you were ready to jump in.
Yes, let me comment on the goal setting just to keep everyone like understanding why we are doing that usually from Vision 2030. And I think even the banks and every fintech are following the same. You can feel satisfied about yourself when you put your goal realistic. So you will grow 10, 15%. So you said 15% to achieve it. But if you put your goal really, really high from the setting and you missed it, doesn't matter. If you overachieve, what is your realistic goal? If you expected 20, but you put I said the goal will be 300%, which is insanely crazy. But you go to 100 or 150, that's double or triple what you've been satisfied about, but still more than enough. That's what we are doing in Saudi. And instead of we put 1 or 2, 3 goals, we put 100 goals. And those 100 goals, if you achieve 50% of them, that's way beyond the norm. And this is regardless, don't be afraid of missing the goal with one condition. Set the bar really, really high.
Yeah.
Shoot to the star. That's where MBS, our crown prince, put it in Vision 2030. And he moved the entire nation. Even if you go to talk to any residents in Saudi, regardless his nationality, he's part of that movement.
Yeah.
He's part of that, setting goals and talking about setting a company or a startup or being part of a big corporation like Bank Al Jazeera or Visa, or they want to support that vision because they see it realistic. And that's where literally that's what they offer the humanity, because we are solving problem for Saudis and for other regions.
I think one thing we also need to remember is that when you think of banking, it's again not in a vacuum. The whole country, the whole economy, and basically all of humanity revolves around banking. It's essential to what we do. So to transform a country, which Saudi Arabia is going through, banking is absolutely essential. And then when we were earlier talking about regulations within banking, to make sure you have a comprehensive banking sector is essential to the country itself and the transformation. So for me, and I'm sure for Naif and Naim also, it's pretty exciting to be part of something that is an absolute critical engine of the country's transformation. And I think that is what excites us as professionals. That's what excites fintechs in terms of coming into Saudi Arabia to say, we're actually part of Saudi Arabia's growth strategy. So it's not just about banking. It's not just about fintech. And even if you think of, the last 15, 20, maybe even 30 years, there are very few countries that have gone through such a massive transformation. And I speak to entrepreneurs all the time. And if you think about entrepreneurs, what they're really passionate about is change and being part of something where they say, you know what, I'm building something that is much bigger than who I am and what my company is about. So Saudi Arabia presents one of those unique opportunities where if you look at it from a fintech and just an entrepreneurship point of view, companies that will come here and develop something that's successful will be leaving a legacy and an imprint on the country itself. It's not just about a specific sector or business. They could really be part of a truly incredible growth story. And I think that is what excites entrepreneurs generally, and especially when they're thinking of coming into the region, they're like, well, tell us what's happening in Saudi Arabia, because we hear a lot. How can we be part of that growth story? And I think that is something that's very exciting, that gets the founders excited, because that's what they're passionate about.
Yeah. And I think that ambition is just, it resonates from all of you. And this is from Bank Al Jazeera, sort of rich history in the country, and from where you were as an incumbent kind of to a forefront player. But then also Naif from like a fintech perspective, and that shared ambition across the scale of businesses is so critical to the transformation that we're getting into. And there's so much more that I would like to talk about, but we are going to have to pause there so we can go to break, and then we will come back afterwards. So coming up, we will take a closer look at what products are on offer in Saudi and how investment in digital services is transforming the landscape, if you haven't already got an idea of just how much is going on there. We'll be back after this quick break, so don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Fintech Insider Focus, where we are taking a closer look at the Saudi Arabian banking system and the growth of its digital landscape. We've established that the country has huge ambitions to grow its financial sector, and they're making concerted efforts to achieve that. But let's dive a bit deeper into this. And so we know the growth of the banking sector is somewhat reliant on the growth of the markets, needing banking services. We talked about that in the first part of this. And so how is Saudi supporting all of the small businesses and startups that come with that? Hassan, I'd love to start with you and to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. So from a fintech support point of view, Visa does quite a bit of work with Saudi Fintech, which is the primary agency responsible for creating this fintech ecosystem. And I can tell you this, we've had a number of conversations with them. We're working on a few other things that will be publicized in the next few weeks. But I have, in my entire experience, probably never met a group of people that are so passionate about what they're doing. And also, to the earlier discussion we had, so open to ideas. Because what they know is that if you want to create this fintech ecosystem, and we want to create in a way that's sustainable for growth, they need to continually evolve. So I think that that's the important thing, because what works today will not work 2 years from now, and what works 2 years from now won't work 4 years from now. So going in with the mindset to sort of acknowledge that we need to continuously evolve as the market evolves, and most importantly, as consumers evolve. When you have a regulatory body, or when you have a government agency that sort of has that view on it, that makes it a lot easier for entrepreneurs to operate in that ecosystem, because what they know is, I think if the one thing entrepreneurs are very confident about is change, because they know that they'll have to change, they know the market will change, they know the consumer will change. And sometimes entrepreneurs do worry a little bit about, well, the market is evolving very quickly. I know that I can evolve my market, but will the conditions around me evolve as quickly to allow me to keep pace with what's happening in the market? And one of the things we consistently hear is people feel very confident coming to Saudi Arabia to know that, yes, Saudi Arabia is changing very dramatically and very quickly. But they feel very confident that the support system around that, be it regulators, be it different government agencies, be it the support infrastructure, can evolve at the same pace or if not faster. So that is, I think, a very unique aspect of the support that the government is providing to fintech. And I think that also applies to basically all the sectors that are now going through an evolution, not just fintech, but broadly speaking, across the entire economy.
Yeah, and you can definitely see it in numbers. So Arab News report that 1.2 million SMEs are now based in Saudi Arabia. And I know that the small business and micro enterprise scene is very busy there. Something in the UK that we've really seen impact small businesses, and I suppose in the US as well, is this cost of living crisis. And so, Naif, I'd love to hear, in this environment, is that something as a fintech, as a smaller business, that your company feels like? Is that cost of living trickling down, and are you getting that support to survive?
Actually, the SME sector, one of the area, or any startup or even a fintech, we have the support from the government through a couple of initiatives. And I will name some, and Naim, help me please if I miss any one of important ones. Believe it or not, there's one initiative for fintech and other tech startup to relocate to Saudi, and they will support them financially. So bring your company from any part of the world to Riyadh or to Saudi Arabia. The second is they subsidize some salaries of the tech team. They subsidize and they encourage the Saudi founder even to be full-time founders if they are part-time. So they focus, and actually what the government say, or what this initiative say, is share the risk with the founders to go all the way to their fintech. One important rule actually, or regulation announced 3 years ago or 4 years ago for SMEs, which is to give you preferences to certain number of all the big contracts with the government. Even if your price is higher, up to 10%, you can win that governmental contract or with big corporation because you are classified as an SME. But there's a lot of governmental initiatives. I argue every founders or interested business men and women to go and explore it. You can find it in Invest in Saudi platform. You can find it with Ministry of Investment, Ministry of Commerce, and even Saudi FinTech part. So for us in Haka as a FinTech, the SME is a big client for us because we are partnering with them and they are our customers. If you look for their employees, for example, I agree with Naim when he said underbank is underserved. And that's the same definition with them, because by rule, anyone in Saudi can open a banking account, but not anyone can be served by the bank or get any banking products. And here where we come to help them to get an access. Our main product is social savings, which is built on the customer behavior and cultural product, which is called CEMEA or Roska or Shed Fund or Tandas, depends on where you came from. But that is our product, and that's where SMEs is helping their employees to get access to finance or access to fund.
Yeah. And on that point, so savings is obviously one part of this. Lending is obviously a huge capability that banks need to offer. And I know in Saudi, there's a cultural mindset around lending and trying to steer away from it. But actually, we've seen some real innovation in the field. And I think we've seen innovation from a consumer perspective, but also from how banks are helping fund smaller businesses and keep that flow of capital going. Naim, I'd love to hear a little bit more around your perspective on lending and Bank Al Jazeera's place in that.
You know, I'll even take it one step further, right? I'll talk a little bit about the values, right? If I can put some terms to it, right? You know, I think the culture and the value is all about trust, transparency, ethics, right? Which is, if you go back to the early days of banking, right, in Italy, etc., right, that's what it was all about, right? And it seems to go over the generations and over the global financial crisis. It's got a bit, become very sensitive and a hot topic for many countries, right, with the regulators taking a keen interest. If you look at the 2030 vision, right, I mean, I think the whole thing here is, right, to jump up, I think, the share of SME lending from about 2% to 20%, right? So it's like you're 10xing this thing, right? And it's like, yep, we'll get it done, right? As Naif said. And I think underneath that, right, the thinking is, okay, how do we build this ecosystem, right? So what are the facilities that we can provide, right, that can help, right? What are these come here, we will support you, right? We will give you the right expertise. You have Fintech Saudi, an excellent institution, right? You know, often around the world, you always suffer from a lack of data, right? Or a lack of collaboration, or somebody pulling these things together between the banks, right? And if you look at some of their reports, and I encourage anybody listening to this podcast to go to the Fintech Saudi website, right? Great resources, right? I mean, phenomenal, right? You can see the consumer view, the data on payments, etc. And even I think CEMEA, the central bank, has a huge data set as well. But I think the Fintech Saudi one is really talks to the areas we're talking to. And when if you delve down into the SME portion of it, right, it's not just the banks, right? We've got a couple of really core institutions that have been set up. There's the Kafala Fund, right, or the Kafala Institute, which is doing phenomenal work in the SME space, supporting SMEs, right? You also have the SME Bank, right? And then you also have the banks themselves, who know that SMEs are going to power this transformation. Yes, you have the giga projects, the 18 giga projects. Yes, you have the 36 mega projects. But really, when it comes to bread and butter issues, right, as you mentioned, Naif, right, in terms of cost of living, I think Saudi has been a bit insulated in certain respects. But there's also this illusion that everybody in Saudi is rich, right? Which is something I think we need to dispel, right? You do have a young population, you do have a very hungry population, eager for growth and development. But it's not a one size fits all. When it comes to lending within the bank, right, to these SMEs, I think a lot of them have struggled, right? They go through and here's some of the challenges, right? Yes, we've gone and we've accelerated, but still some core challenges remain. I always talk about, there's a lot of spaghetti in a lot of banks. That's why they're always trying to modernize their core banking systems, their processes and their technology. But I also think like, risk scoring, credit scoring, right, for these entities, right, are becoming much more simpler, right? Using like new data sets out there, plugging into other data sources, right, which have been excellent, right, to help these SMEs, reducing those turnaround times, right? If you look back maybe 2 years ago, an SME trying to get a loan, right, it would take them maybe 2 months. Right, it's a nightmare, right? And you basically have to give up your records from the time you were probably your great-great-grandfather was born, right? It's like going for a visa appointment, I always say. But I think things are becoming good. Now, this is where I think there's a huge, I'd say untapped, because I know there's a lot of fintechs looking at this B2B SME space, right? And I think they're going to crack it. And I think they're not going to crack it alone. I think they're going to crack it with some of the banks supporting them. Banks, when I say banks supporting, both from the expertise and knowledge of how to commercialize these the startups, but also the banks leveraging this, right, as an extension of the services, right? There's no more this, us and them situation, right? I think in many ways as well, I think that ended very early when CEMEA used to, in respects, give a lot more preference, right, to fintechs and startup, right, to challenge us, right, to do better, to grow better. And I think the two words that we use quite often in the bank is outcome and impact. What's the outcome? What's the impact, right? We're not worried about chasing activity, right? It's outcome and impact. And we think this SME market is going to be huge. Like you said, there's 1.2 million, right? Huge numbers coming up, right? We want to also change the dynamic, right? It's a mix, right? This SME space for our listeners out there is used. It's micro SME, right? It's 0 to 40, right? And then 40 to 200. Those are somebody earning 1 million, 40 million versus 200 is very different, right? You've got your moms and pop stores there, right? You've got the businesses that are just trying to get over the line, right, to get those green shoots, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us there, and definitely as Bank Al Jazeera, it's an area that We have a strategic focus on.
Yeah. Oh, one to watch. Hassan, I've seen you nodding very enthusiastically throughout this. I'm sure you, with your work with all the entrepreneurs in the area, you've definitely come across a lot of this.
Yes. So the two things that when we talk about SMEs, one of the things we need to remember is that in most economies in the world, SMEs actually are the largest employers. And that's true even in Western countries, where if you combine all the SMEs together, they actually employ the biggest segment of the population. So again, when we tie that back to some of the broader goals that Saudi Arabia has, SMEs are essential to drive that next generation of economic growth, if you would, right? The second part is, and Naim touched on this a little bit, which was to say that when we talk about things like lending, right, there's better ways to do things like credit scoring. There's better ways to actually disperse the loan. And we are seeing a lot of very interesting startups actually specializing in those specific verticals. So when we talk about making lending easier, there's an element of de-risking lending. And we talked a lot about the data that exists. So now you're seeing a lot of startups that specialize in data analysis for credit lending. You see a lot of startups that actually model out what through alternative data. So if you have a new SME that's being set up, by definition, they don't have transaction history. The individual might not have a lot of banking history. So what they're trying to figure out is, can we use things that we would broadly qualify as alternative data that are predictive of the success of that company? So from a fintech point of view, SME space is absolutely amazing because there's a lot of work that can be done. And it's a lot of interesting work because it's not like you can take an existing idea and tweak it. You really need to come up with a whole new idea. And that is where we see a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, and it's not just for SMEs. Obviously, you've made a very good point about data here. Consumers are now expecting their data to be used better and to serve them, and actually hyper personalization, it's a big buzzword, but it's actually it's really important because what we're talking about is using customers' data to deliver contextual services. And to me, it marks the sign of like creating a truly digital financial services environment. Open question to the room: are we starting to see some examples of that hyper personalization in action?
Yes and no. If you want to start first, and sorry for that. Yes and no. Buzzword always giving the hype. But back to reality, what people need for today and tomorrow, for their near future, and that's what they need to tackle their problem. I will give you a very simple example with Haka, what happened with us when we started in 2020, and to give also Visa the credit. I know you're sponsoring the episode, but they're big supporter to Haka since day one. We signed a partnership with them. And at that time, we just in ideation, and we have just the first version of the product. So we got part of the fast track program and Visa FinTech partners. And the idea is all the savings to be bought, instead of transfer it to the bank account, we bought it in prepaid card. We couldn't launch it because no one at that time wanted to give us the BIN sponsorship. It wasn't allowed. So we hit a lot of walls. It's not always rosy. But since then, we go all the way with the banks and with Visa between technical session and educations and even courses online with the tech team and the sales team, how to do it. And that is not entirely waste. Yes, we didn't launch it because until now, it's just recently actually some banks allowed to certain numbers under supervision of the CEMEA, central bank, but which means sometimes timing is everything. So when we talk about personalization, definitely it's like the dream. So we can give everyone what he's looking for. And it required a lot of research and a lot of development, but do they really need it? What the customer really wants.
Can I jump in there, right? This is such this is very exciting for me, right? I'm a big fan of the space, right? Because I've done a lot of work with open banking, right? And we, all the talk is about open banking and people sharing data, right? Which is fantastic, right? But then I think of people like my mom, right? And after like 10, 15 years, right? I've been telling her, don't share your PIN, don't share anything, right? With anybody. They're like, yeah. Just say yes, right? And
just log in.
Just log in and it'll be fine. They'll give you great offers, innovative products. And my mom give me this look. And I think, that's one challenge, right? That's from the consumer perspective. It's a bit of conflicting messages, right? There's also this other part from the regulator, right? Yeah, data is great, right? But how do you make sure it's secure, right? We work with a couple of great open banking players, and I'll name check some of them. There's many of them, right? So apologies if I don't. Like if I look at Lean, Terabot, right, who are doing fantastic work in this space, right? Building the infrastructure with the banks and allowing this data share. But they have to go through a lot of proof cases, right? To show, not use cases, proof cases to show that how secure, right? What happens if something goes wrong? Who is liable? Is it the bank? Is it the fintech? So it's very challenging, right? To Naif's point, right? But I do think there are opportunities here, definitely, right? If you think about how, especially for this SME segment, right? How can I pull these different data sets, right? Which entities I can connect APIs to, right? And we've seen some great examples, right? Yakin, great example, right? Identity verification, right? Which not all countries have gotten right. I think India's got it right. It's done a good job right there, right? Singapore, South Korea doing some always fantastic work, right? And in many ways, we look at South Korea for their transformation and how well they've done. So I think there are some success cases here, right? But I think it's going to be very challenging around this data component. I think it will help. I would also say that, I don't think everybody likes the idea of seeing all their transactions on a pretty graph. I spent 100 riyals on my grocery. Yes, I know I spent 100 riyals on my grocery.
Don't tell me.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
It's too late.
I think it's about what's next, right? How are you really going to help me? If I'm thinking of an SME, right? Can you do a cash flow analysis for me, right? And pitch me the right solution, right? If maybe I need a top up, right? To do my salary payroll expenses, right, for the month, so that I could do it without like overcharging me or making me jump through many loops, right? A simple, practical example is that, right? And I also think for SMEs, they also need a bit of the business support knowledge around it, right? It's not just about the loan, right? Everybody thinks, yeah, loan, right? We'll get in, we'll help them out, but they also need a bit of coaching and mentorship. And I think this is where the rest of the ecosystem, right? Whether it be entities like Visa, right? Who I think that the startup program is fantastic, right? We've seen a lot of graduates come through, right, and work with us in the bank and continue to work in the bank. And I would also like to say, I think the banks are also, I wouldn't say stealing, right, but definitely copying and accelerating.
No, they stole before. Let's admit that.
But that's great. It challenges all of us to go to the next level, the next level, the next level.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's the fantastic part of it.
You have brought us to a great point to end on. We actually had said in the break that there's so much more that we could talk about, but we are unfortunately running out of time. So on the topic of what's next, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a challenge. We started talking about, what's that one word that we would describe the fintech ecosystem in Saudi right now in the banking sector. To wrap us up, I would love a one-word answer on what we think is coming next. You can split it out to 2 words, but what's next for fintech in Saudi? Naif, would you like to start? It's a tricky one.
Yeah, it is. But let me put it from our strategy for the next, which is we align it with what next is interconnected product offering all the way of the savings and investment spectrum, aligning with the banks. So that's the big. There's many areas not covered, like religion tech and even SMEs, lending and investment and individuals. My advice, or what I'm saying always, forget the buzzword, go down to the street, solve the today and tomorrow problem.
Great. Naim, what about you?
I've got a great 2 words: big time. Right, and I think it's been the motto for the Riyadh season, right, for this year. But I think big time, because big time this change is coming. Big time. We haven't even spoken about sustainability, carbon tracking, right? Ethical investment. Oh wow, right? We probably have another 2-3 episodes, right? We should do like what they call them, after dark session in Riyadh, right? I definitely think so. But I think if I could leave people with, as I said, right, I'm a big fan of Clayton Christensen, right? Jobs to be done, problems to be solved. How do you help with wealth transfer, right? From this aging generation to this young dynamic generation, right? Big time changes are coming. Big time you can make an impact here and get the outcomes. So I invite everybody, right? If you want to see transformation in action, if you want to be part of something special, come to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, come to Riyadh, come to Jeddah, go anywhere in Saudi Arabia. You will learn, grow, develop, and you'll make a contribution to something bigger than yourself and leave a lasting legacy.
But don't go in June or July because it's absolutely roasting.
No,
depends on where. Depends on where in Saudi, by the way.
I agree. Yes. I think it's not as bad.
It's 14 degrees. It's 14 degrees in Abha, for example. 14 degrees in the summer.
And Hassan, wrap us up. What do you think is coming next?
So if I were to put one word, I think it's going to be unbelievable. Because when we look back at this time, people will say it's unbelievable what the country went through and what the banking and fintech ecosystem went through. And I think the reason I say that is because it's very rare for a number of different things to come together. So we've seen other parts of the world that have gone through, pretty big transformation. But the unique thing about Saudi Arabia is, yes, there's a vision in place. There's funding in place. It's a very stable country. The economy is big enough that it can sustain this growth for a long period of time. The regulation is there. The government support is there. The ecosystem is there. So I can't think of another example where all of these things have sort of coalesced at one time. You've usually had regions of the world where 2 or 3 things were there, but something else was quite not there. In the case of Saudi Arabia, everything is coalescing. So when we come back and look at sort of the next 5 years, let's say 6 years from now, when we'll look back at the 5 years, we'll say, wow, that was unbelievable. So I think that is the one word. You'll have to call me in 6 years and say, was I right or not?
We'll have a little reunion.
Yes.
Well, that wraps up today's very interesting, so much more to say and just the tip of the iceberg discussion. Thank you all so much for joining me. If people want to find out a little bit more about you all, where would they go? Hassan, would you like to start?
I think LinkedIn would probably be the best place. My profile is there. Obviously, you can look us up on the Visa website. We do a lot of programs, including Naif mentioned the Fintech Fast Track program. So there's a lot of information online available where people can understand how Visa provides support to fintechs. And then also we have a Visa Everywhere initiative, which is actually a startup competition, and we're hosting that in Saudi Arabia over the summer. And I can come back to you guys with sort of updated dates. But there's a lot of information available online. For my personal profile, LinkedIn is probably the best place to go.
Great stuff. Naim, what about you?
Firstly, obviously, LinkedIn, Twitter, any reputable social media site, I'm there, right? You'll also find me. I generally do a lot of talks at different conferences, etc. Right? So within the fintech ecosystem, you can ask for me. You'll get around to me. bankaljazeera.com. Go to our website. You'll see all our contact details. Feel free to reach out. Happy to connect and link up other people, build the ecosystem out, right? And sometimes you actually might find me training for a triathlon, right? So you might see me on the roads trying to run, right?
Oh, well, braver than I am for sure. And Naif, what about you?
It's the same. LinkedIn is always the best, and also on hakba.com. If you need any more about Hakba, to know more about the social savings or what we are doing, either for partnership or for investment, or even to guidance, if you want to bring your startup here, we are happy to help with that.
Amazing. And you can find me, I'm Rachel Pandyan, on LinkedIn, or of course here at 11FS. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you've heard, follow our podcast and don't forget to leave us a review. It helps us to make it better and helps others find the show. As always, if you want to join the conversation, find us on social media. Just search for 11FS or Fintech Insider, or email podcasts@11fs.com. Thank you very much and goodbye.